Yeah. Yes, sir. And we're back. Chapter 7. Anatomy and Physiology. Yeah. Tina Saunders. Absolutely. Absolutely. We're gonna jump right into it. But don't fret, we got some ways to go, but we halfway there. Absolutely. This time we're talking about the muscle system. Yeah. Get your libations. You ready?
If you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But by all means, keep moving.
Do you like to dance? Most of us do. Or we may simply enjoy watching good dancers. The grace and coordination involved in dancing result from the interaction of many of the organ systems. But the one you think of first is probably the muscular system. There are more than 600 muscles in the human body. Most of these muscles are attached to the bones of skeleton by tendons, although a few muscles are attached to the undersurface of the skin. The primary function of the muscular system is to move the skeleton. The muscle contractions required for movement also produce heat, which contributes to the maintenance of constant body temperature. The other body systems directly involved in movement are the nervous, respiratory, and circulatory systems. The nervous system, by way of motor neurons, transmit the electrochemical impulses that cause muscle cells to contract. The respiratory system exchanges oxygen and carbon dioxide between the air and blood. The circulatory system brings oxygen to the muscles and takes carbon dioxide away. These interactions of body systems are covered in the chapter, which focuses on the skeletal muscles. You may recall from chapter 4 that there are two other types of muscle tissue, smooth muscle and cardiac muscle. These types of muscle tissue will be discussed in other chapters in relation to the organs of which they are a part. Before you continue, you may find it helpful to go back to chapter 4 and review the structure and characteristics of skeletal muscle. In this chapter, we will begin with the gross, large anatomy and physiology of muscles, then discuss the microscopic structure of muscle cells and the biochemistry of muscle contraction. Muscle structure. All muscle cells are specialized for contraction. When skeletal muscle cells contract, they shorten and pull a bone to produce movement. Each skeletal muscle is made of thousands of individual muscle cells, which also may be called myocytes or muscle fibers. Depending on the work a muscle is required to do, variable numbers of muscle fibers contract. When finger muscles grip to pick up a pencil, for example, only a small portion of the muscle fibers in each finger flexing muscle will contract. If the muscle has more work to do, such as picking up a book, more muscle fibers will contract to accomplish the task. Muscles are anchored firmly to bones by tendons. Most tendons are rope-like, but some are flat. A flat tendon is called an aponeurosis. Later in this chapter for epicranial aponeurosis, but before you look, decide what epicranial means and what part of the body you're going to see. Close parentheses. Tendons are made of fibrous connective tissue, which you may remember is very strong. A tendon merges with the fascia that covers the muscle and with the periosteum, the fibrous connective tissue membrane that covers bones. A muscle usually has at least two tendons, each attached to a different bone. The more immobile or stationary attachment of the muscle is its origin. The more immobile or stationary attachment of the muscle is its origin. The more movable attachment is called the insertion. The muscle itself crosses the joint of the two bones to which it is attached, and when the muscle contracts, it pulls on its insertion to move the bone in a specific direction. Muscle arrangements. Muscle arrangements. Muscles are arranged around the skeleton and across joints so as to bring about a variety of movements. The two general types of arrangements are the opposing antagonist and the cooperative synergist. Antagonists are opponents, so we use the term antagonist muscles for muscles that have opposing or opposite functions. An example will be helpful here. Refer to figure 7.1 as you read the following. The biceps brachii is the muscle on the front of the upper arm. The origin of the biceps is on the scapula. In parentheses, there are actually two tendons. There are actually two tendons, hence the name biceps, close parentheses. And the insertion is on the radius. When the biceps contract, it pulls on the radius and flexes the forearm. That is, bends the elbow. Recall that when a muscle contracts, it gets shorter and pulls. Muscles cannot push because when they relax, they exert no force. Therefore, the biceps can bend the elbow but cannot straighten it. Another muscle is needed. The triceps brachii is located on the back of the upper arm. Its origin, in parentheses, the prefix tri tells you that there are three of them, close parentheses. Its origins are on the scapula and humerus, and its insertion is on the back of the ulna. When the triceps contract and pulls on the ulna, it extends the forearm, that is, straightens the elbow. Joints that are capable of a variety of movements have several sets of antagonists. Notice how many ways you can move your upper arm at the shoulder, for instance. Abducting, laterally raising the arm, is the function of the deltoid muscle that caps the shoulder. Adducting the arm is brought about by the pectoralis major and latissimus dorsi. Flexion of the arm, in parentheses, across the chest, close parentheses, is also a function of the pectoralis major, and extension of the arm, in parentheses, behind the back, close parentheses, is also a function of the latissimus dorsi. All of these muscles are described and depicted in the tables and figures later in the chapter. Without antagonist muscles, this variety of movement would not be possible. You may be familiar with the range of motion exercises, which are often recommended for patients who must remain in bed for long periods of time. Such exercises are designed to stretch and contact the antagonist muscles of the joint to preserve as much muscle function and joint mobility as possible. Synergistic muscles. Synergistic muscles are those with the same function or those that work together to perform a particular function. Recall that biceps brachii flexes the forearm. The brachioradialis with its origin on the humerus and insertion on the radius also flexes the forearm. There is even a third flexor of the forearm, the brachialis. You may wonder why we need three muscles to perform the same function, and the explanation lies in the great mobility of the hand. If the hand is palm up, the bicep does most of the work of flexing and may be called the prime mover. When the hand is thumb down, the brachioradialis is in position to be the prime mover, and when the hand is palm down, the brachialis becomes the prime mover. If you have ever tried to do chin-ups, you know that it is much easier with your palms toward you than with your palms away from you. This is because the biceps is a larger and usually much stronger muscle than is the brachialis. Muscles may also be called synergists if they help to stabilize or steady a joint to make a more precise movement possible. If you drink a glass of water, the biceps brachii may be the prime mover to flex the forearm. At the same time, the muscles of the shoulder keep that joint stable so that the water gets to your mouth, not over your shoulder or down your chin. The shoulder muscles are considered synergists for this movement because their contribution makes the movement effective. The role of the brain. Even our simplest movements require the interaction of many muscles, and the contraction of skeletal muscles depends on the brain. The nerve impulses for movement come from the frontal lobes of the cerebrum. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. The frontal lobes are beneath the frontal bone. The motor areas of the frontal lobes generate electrochemical impulses that travel along motor neurons, in parentheses, grouped in nerves, to muscle fibers, travel along motor neurons grouped in nerves, close parentheses, to muscle fibers, causing the muscle fibers to contract. The single axon of a motor neuron may branch extensively, and one neuron may therefore innervate from a few to hundreds of muscle fibers. This is called a motor unit. Small motor units with 2 to 100 muscle fibers per neuron are found in muscles that perform small, precise movements, such as those that move the fingers or eyes. Large motor units with several hundred or more muscle fibers per neuron are found in muscles where the need is usually for powerful movements rather than precise movements, such as the large muscles of the legs and hips. For a movement to be effective, some muscles must contract while others relax. When we are walking, for example, antagonist muscles on the front and back of the thigh or the lower leg will alternate their contractions and relaxations, and our steps will be smooth and efficient. This is what we call coordination, and we do not have to think about making it happen. Coordination takes place below the level of conscious thought and is regulated by the cerebellum, which is located below the occipital lobes of the cerebrum. The cerebellum is also responsible for balance, keeping the body upright, in parentheses, unless we choose not to be, close parentheses. The cerebellum gets information from receptors in the inner ear for equilibrium and uses it to balance the contractions of antagonistic sets of muscles so that the actions of one set do not result in the body falling over. Takeaways. 1. Where would you find a synergist for a muscle on the back of the thigh that flexes the lower leg? 2. Where does voluntary movement originate? Be as specific and complete as you can. 3. What other organ systems are directly necessary for movement? Muscle tone. Except during certain stages of sleep, most of our muscles are in a state of slight contraction. That is what is known as muscle tone. When sitting upright, for example, the tone of your neck muscles keeps your head up, and the tone of your back muscles keep your back straight. This is an important function of muscle tone for human beings because it helps us to maintain an upright posture. For a muscle to remain slightly contracted, only a few of the muscle fibers in that muscle must contract. Alternate fibers, in parentheses, different motor units, close parentheses, contract so that the muscle as a whole does not become fatigued. That is similar to a pianist continuously rippling her fingers at any given moment, but the notes that are sounding are always changing. This contraction of alternate fibers, muscle tone, is also regulated by the cerebellum of the brain. Muscle fibers need the energy of ATP, in parentheses, adenosine triphosphate, close parentheses, in order to contract. When they produce ATP in the process of cell respiration, muscle fibers also produce heat. The heat generated by normal muscle tone is approximately 25% of the total body heat at rest. During exercise, of course, heat production increases significantly. Exercise. Good muscle tone improves coordination. When muscles are slightly contracted, they can react more rapidly if and when greater exertion is necessary. Muscles with poor tone are usually soft and flabby, but exercise will improve muscle tone. There are two general types of exercise: isotonic and isometric. In isotonic exercise, muscle contract and bring about movement. Jogging, swimming, weightlifting, and walking are examples. Isotonic exercise improves muscle tone, muscle strength, and if done repetitively, against great resistance, as in weightlifting, muscle size. This type of exercise also improves cardiovascular and respiratory efficiency because movement exerts demands on the heart and respiratory muscles. If done for 30 minutes or longer, such exercise may be called aerobic because it strengthens the heart and respiratory muscles as well as the muscles attached to the skeleton. Isotonic contractions are of two kinds, concentric or eccentric. A concentric contraction is the shortening of a muscle as it exerts force. An eccentric contraction is the lengthening of a muscle as it still exerts force. Imagine lifting a book straight up, in parentheses, or try it, close parentheses. The triceps brachii contracts and shortens to strengthen the elbow and raise the book, a concentric contraction. Now imagine slowly lowering the book. The triceps brachii is still contracting even as it is lengthening. That is, returning to its original length. It is exerting force to oppose gravity, in parentheses, which would make the book drop quickly, close parentheses. This is an eccentric contraction. Isometric exercise involves contraction without movement. If you put your palms together and push one hand against the other, you can feel your arm muscles contracting. If both hands push equally, there will be no movement. This is isometric contraction. Such exercises will increase muscle tone and muscle strength, but are not considered aerobic. When the body is moving, the brain receives sensory information about this movement from the joints involved and responds with reflexes that increase heart rate and respiration. Without movement, the brain does not get this sensory information, and heart rate and breathing do not increase nearly as much as they would during an equally strenuous isotonic exercise. Many of our action involves both isotonic and isometric contractions. Pulling open a door requires isotonic contractions of the arm muscle. But if the door is then held open for someone else, those contractions become isometric. Picking up a pencil is isotonic. Holding it in your hand is isometric. Walking uphill involves concentric isotonic contractions and may be quite strenuous. Walking downhill seems easier but is no less complex. The eccentric isotonic contractions involved make each step a precisely aimed and controlled fall against gravity. Without such control, in parentheses, which we do not have to think about, close parentheses, a downhill walk would quickly become a roll. These various kinds of contractions are needed for even the simplest activity, in parentheses, with respect to increasing muscle strength, close parentheses. Exercise also brings out another aspect of skeletal muscle, this one more recently discovered. Striatic muscle is also an endocrine tissue, and exercise stimulates the secretion of the hormone irisin. The hormone, in parentheses, a myokine. A myokine means muscle signaler, close parentheses, affects adipose. This hormone affects adipose tissue and converts white adipocytes to brown or beige adipocytes. Recall from chapter 4 that white fat cells store fat, but brown and beige fat cells are thermogenic, that is, heat producing. They metabolize fat to CO2 and H2O, and the energy is released as heat. In part, this is why regular and consistent exercise can contribute to weight loss. Muscle sense. When you walk up a flight of stairs, do you have to look at your feet to be sure each will get to the next step? Most of us don't. And for this freedom, we can thank our muscle sense. Muscle sense in parentheses, proprioception, close parentheses, is the brain's ability to know where our muscles are and what they are doing without our having to look at them and be aware of them. A simple way to demonstrate this is to put your hand behind your back or simply out of sight. Make a fist, then slowly open your hand. Can you feel that your fingers are moving, going from curled to straight again? This is muscle sense. Within muscles are receptors called stretch receptors, in parentheses, or proprioceptors, or muscle spindles, close parentheses. The general function of all sensory receptors is to detect changes. The function of stretch receptors is to detect changes in the length of a muscle as it is stretched. The sensory impulses generated by these receptors are interpreted by the brain as a mental picture of where the muscle is. When you open your fist, could you form a conscious mental picture of where your fingers were? Probably, but most often the brain simply uses its unconscious pictures of where muscles are. We can be aware of muscle sense if we choose to be, but usually we can safely take it for granted. In fact, that is what we are meant to do. Imagine what life would be like if we had to watch every move to be sure that a hand or foot performed its intended action. Even simple activities such as walking or eating would require our constant attention. At times, we may become aware of our muscle sense. Learning a skill such as typing or playing the guitar involves very precise movements of the fingers, and beginners will often watch their fingers to be sure they are moving properly. With practice, however, the movements simply feel right, which means that the brain has formed a very good mental picture of the task, in parentheses, including the keyboard or a muscle instrument, close parentheses. Muscle sense becomes unconscious for that particular task and is sometimes called muscle memory, though it is actually the brain that is doing the remembering. And the experienced typist or guitarist need not watch every movement. We can also take notice and be aware of the muscle sense of others. Characters in television shows or movies may carry containers of coffee. The containers almost always have lids. Why? Because the containers are probably empty. How can we tell? Watch how the character gestures with the arm or watch how the character's gestures with the arm or hand holding the container. Is the movement swift or abrupt? Often it is, which means that the container has no heft, no real weight, and certainly no liquid sloshing around inside. The brain's mental picture of the container includes its weight, in parentheses, which indicates what is inside, air or something else, in parentheses. And if the container is even half full of liquid, in parentheses, the sensory area of the brain know this too. From the moment the hand takes the cup, they can perceive even minimal sloshing, close parentheses. The motor areas of the brain will not be waving it around to spill. Another indication of empty containers might be characters who sip their coffee but never seem to swallow. All sensation is a function of brain activity in specific, localized areas, and muscle sense is no exception. The impulses for muscle sense are integrated in the parietal lobes of the cerebrum, in parentheses, conscious muscle sense, close parentheses, and in the cerebellum, close parentheses, unconscious muscle sense, close parentheses, and are used to promote coordination. Before we continue, let us put what we have presented so far into a simple example. A person drops a pencil and bends to pick it up. What happens? The position of the head changes. The position of the eye change. The inner ear receptors are generating many impulses. The cerebrum and cerebellum have to make sense of a world half upside down. The legs bend a little and the cerebellum ensures that they will still support the body even as it leans over. The frontal lobe gets the arm muscles reaching for the pencil and the finger muscles ready to grasp it. Success. Pencil in hand. The frontal lobes get the body upright again. The cerebellum making sure the body does not go too far the other way and topple. Yes, all this and, of course, the muscles sense assisting every move. Do we have to think about this sort of thing? No, we do not. Not beyond a conscious decision to pick up the pencil. Takeaways. 1. Is muscle tone voluntary or involuntary? Does it require energy? Is the brain involved in muscle tone? 2. What receptors are important for muscle sense, and what does the brain do with the sensory impulses they provide? Energy sources for muscle contraction. Before discussing the contraction process itself, let us look first at how muscle fibers obtain energy they need to contract. The direct source of energy for muscle contraction is ATP. ATP, however, is not stored in large amounts of muscle fibers and in contracting fibers is depleted in a few seconds. The secondary energy sources are creatine phosphate and glycogen. Creatine phosphate is like ATP, an energy transferring molecule when it is broken down in parentheses by enzymes, close parentheses, to creatine, phosphate, and energy. The energy is used to synthesize more ATP. Most of the creatine formed is used to resynthesize creatine phosphate, but some is converted to creatinine, a nitrogenous waste product that is excreted by the kidneys. The most abundant energy source in muscle fibers is glycogen. When glycogen is needed to provide energy for sustained contractions, in parentheses, more than a few seconds, it is first, close parentheses, it is first broken down into the glucose molecules of which it is made. Glucose is then further broken down in the process of cell respiration to produce ATP, and muscle fibers may continue to contract. Recall from chapter 2 our simple reaction for cell respiration. Glucose plus O2 turns to CO2 plus H2O plus ATP plus heat. Look first at the products of this reaction. ATP will be used by the muscle fibers for contraction. The heat produced will contribute to body temperature and, if exercise is strenuous, will increase body temperature. The water becomes part of intracellular water, and the carbon dioxide is a waste product that will be exhaled. Now look at what is needed to release energy from glucose oxygen. If oxygen is present, cell respiration is said to be an aerobic process. Muscles have two sources of oxygen. The blood delivers a continuous supply of oxygen from the lungs. The oxygen is carried by the hemoglobin in red blood cells. Within muscle fibers themselves, there is another protein called myoglobin, which stores some oxygen within the muscle cells. Both hemoglobin and myoglobin contain the mineral iron, which enables them to bond to oxygen. Iron also makes both molecules red, and it is myoglobin that gives muscle tissue a red or dark color. During strenuous exercise, the oxygen stored in myoglobin is quickly used up, and normal circulation may not deliver oxygen fast enough to permit the completion of aerobic cell respiration. Even though the respiratory rate increases, the muscle fibers may literally run out of oxygen. This state is called oxygen debt, and in this case, glucose cannot be completely broken down into carbon dioxide and water. If oxygen is not present or not present in sufficient amounts, the cell respiration process becomes anaerobic, and glucose is converted to an intermediate molecule called lactic acid, in parentheses, or lactate. C3H5O3, close parentheses. Lactic acid lowers the pH of the intracellular fluid and contributes to muscle fatigue. In a state of fatigue, muscle fibers cannot contract efficiently and contraction may become painful. To be in oxygen debt means that we owe the body some oxygen. Lactic acid from muscle enters the blood and circulates to the liver, where it is converted to pyruvic acid or pyruvate, also 3 carbons, C3H3O3, a simple carbohydrate that can later be used for energy production. This conversion of lactic acid to pyruvic acid requires ATP, and oxygen is needed to produce the necessary ATP in the liver. This is why after strenuous exercise, the respiratory rate and heart rate remain high for a time and only gradually return to normal. Another name for this state is recovery oxygen uptake, which is a little longer but also makes sense. Oxygen uptake means a faster and deeper respiratory rate. What is this uptake for? For recovery from strenuous exercise. Takeaways. 1. Explain the relationship between glucose and glycogen. What kind of molecule is each? Muscle tone requires nerve impulses. 1. Glycogen is a storage form for glucose in muscles. Glucose is a monosaccharide. Glycogen is a polysaccharide. 2. Muscle cells can no longer produce ATP when they lack what substance? How long does the body attempt to prevent this during exertion? Answer. Muscle cells that lack oxygen can no longer carry out aerobic cell respiration. During exertion, breathing rate and heart rate increase to try to prevent or delay oxygen depletion. 3. What protein brings oxygen to muscles? What protein stores oxygen within muscle cells? Answer. Hemoglobin in red blood cells transport oxygen. Myoglobin in muscle cells store oxygen. Muscle fiber microscopic structure. We will now look more closely at muscle fiber, keeping in mind that there are thousands of these cylindrical cells in one muscle. Each muscle fiber has its own motor nerve ending. The neuromuscular junction is where the motor neuron terminates on the muscle fiber. The axon terminal is the enlarged tip of the motor neuron. It contains sacs of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, ACH. The membrane of the muscle fiber is the sarcomere, which contains receptor sites for acetylcholine and an inactivator called cholinesterase. The synapse or synaptic cleft is the small space between the axon terminal and the sarcolemma. Within the muscle fiber are thousands of individual contracting units called sarcomeres, which are arranged end to end in cylinders called myofibrils. The structure of sarcomeres is shown in figure 7.3. The Z-lines are the end boundaries of the sarcomere. Thick filaments are mainly of the protein myosin. Thick filaments made mainly of the protein myosin are in the center of the sarcomere, and thin filaments that contain the protein actin are at the ends, attached to the Z-lines. Myosin filaments are anchored to the Z-lines by the protein titin. Myosin and actin are the contractile proteins of a muscle fiber. Their interactions produce muscle contraction. Also present are 2 inhibitory proteins, troponin and tropomyosin, which are part of the thin filaments and prevent the sliding of actin and myosin when the muscle fiber is relaxed. Surrounding the sarcomeres is the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the endoplasmic reticulum of muscle cells. The sarcoplasmic reticulum is a reservoir of calcium ions, which are essential for the contraction process. All of these parts of a muscle fiber are involved in the contraction process. Contraction begins when a nerve impulse arrives at the axon terminal and stimulates the release of acetylcholine. Acetylcholine generates electrical changes, in parentheses, the movement of ions, close parentheses, at the sarcolemma of the muscle fiber. These electrical changes initiate a sequence of events within the muscle fiber that is called the sliding filament mechanism of muscle contraction. We will begin our discussion with the sarcolemma. Sarcolemma polarization. When a muscle fiber is relaxed, the sarcolemma is polarized, in parentheses, has a resting potential, close parentheses, which refers to a difference in electrical charges between the outside and the inside. During polarization, the outside of the sarcolemma has a positive charge relative to the inside, which is said to have a negative charge. Sodium ions are more abundant outside the cell, and potassium ions and negative ions are more abundant inside the cell. The Na plus ions outside tend to diffuse into the cell, and the sodium pump transfers them back out. The K plus potassium ions inside tend to diffuse out, and the potassium pump returns them inside. Both of these pumps are active transport mechanisms, which you may recall require ATP. Muscle fibers use ATP to maintain a high concentration of Na plus ions outside the cell and a high concentration of K plus inside. The pumps therefore maintain polarization and relaxation until a nerve impulse stimulates a change. Sarcolemma depolarization. When a nerve impulse arrives at the axon terminal, it causes the release of acetylcholine, which diffuses across the synapse and bonds to ACH receptors on the sarcolemma. By doing so, acetylcholine makes the sarcolemma very permeable to Na plus ions, which rush into the cell. This makes the inside of the sarcolemma positive relative to the outside, which is now considered negative. This reversal of charges is called depolarization. The electrical impulse thus generated, called an action potential, then spreads along the entire sarcolemma of a muscle fiber. The sarcolemma has inward folds called T-tubules, in parentheses, transverse tubules, shown in figure 7.2, close parentheses, which carry the action potential to the interior of the muscle cell. Depolarization initiates changes within the cell that brings about contraction and is followed by repolarization to complete the action potential. Repolarization involves the outflow of K plus ions that will restore the positive charge to the outside of the sarcolemma. The electrical changes that take place at the sarcolemma are summarized in Table 7.2 and is shown in Figure 7.4. Takeaways 4. 1. Beginning with the largest, put these in size order: sarcomere, myofibril, myosin. Answer: 1. Myofibril, sarcomere, myosin. One myofibril is made of many smaller sarcomeres lined up end to end, and within each sarcomere are the even smaller contracting proteins myosin and actin. 2. Put these in the order in which they function at a neuromuscular junction: synapse, sarcolemma, axon terminal, acetylcholine. Axon terminal. Answer: axon terminal, acetylcholine, sarcolemma. At a neuromuscular junction, the axon terminal releases acetylcholine, which diffuses across the synapse and stimulates the ACH receptors on the sarcomere. 3. What part of the muscle cell carries the electrical impulses for contraction? Answer. The cell membrane of the muscle cell. The sarcomere carries the electrical impulses for contraction. Contraction, the sliding filament mechanism. All of the parts of the muscle fiber and the electrical changes described earlier are involved in the contraction process, which is a precise sequence of events called the sliding filament mechanism. In summary, a nerve impulse causes depolarization of a muscle fiber, and this electrical change enables the myosin filaments to pull the actin filaments toward the center of the sarcomere, making the sarcomere shorter. All of the sarcomere shorten and the muscle fiber contracts. A more detailed description of this process is the following. 1. A nerve impulse arrives at the axon terminal. Acetylcholine is released and diffuses across the synapse to the sarcomere. 2. Acetylcholine bonds to the acetylcholine receptors and makes the sarcomere more permeable to Na plus ions, which rush into the cell. 3. The sarcomere depolarizes, becoming negative outside and positive inside. The T tubules bring the reversal of the charge to the interior of the muscle cell. 4. Depolarization stimulates the release of Ca plus 2 ions from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Ca plus 2 ions bond to the tropomyosin complex, which shifts it away from the actin filaments. 5. Myosin splits ATP to release its energy. Bridges on the myosin attach to the actin filaments and then pull them toward the center of the sarcomere, thus making the sarcomere shorter. 6. All of the sarcomeres in a muscle fiber shorten. The entire muscle fiber contracts. 7. The sarcomere repolarizes. K plus ions leave the cell, restoring a positive charge outside and a negative charge inside. The pumps then return Na plus ions outside and K plus ions inside. 8. Cholinesterase in the sarcomere inactivates acetylcholine. 9. Subsequent nerve impulses will prolong contraction. In parentheses, more acetylcholine is released. Close parentheses. 10. When there are no further impulses, the muscle fiber will relax and return to its original length. Steps 1 through 8 of this sequence describe a single muscle fiber contraction called a twitch in response to a single nerve impulse. Because all of this takes place in less than a second, useful movements would not be possible if muscle fibers relax immediately after contracting. Normally, however, nerve impulses arrive in a continuous stream and produce a sustained contraction called a tetanus, which is a normal state not to be confused with the disease tetanus. When a tetanus, muscle fibers remain contracted and are capable of effective movements. In a muscle such as the biceps brachii that flexes the forearm, an effective movement means that many of its thousands of muscle fibers are in tetanus, a sustained contraction. As you might expect with such a complex process, muscle contraction may be impaired in many different ways. Perhaps the most obvious is the loss of nerve impulses to muscle fibers, which can occur when nerves or the spinal cord are severed, or when a stroke, in parentheses, cerebrovascular accident, close parentheses, occurs in the frontal lobes of the cerebrum. Without nerve impulses, skeletal muscles become paralyzed, unable to contract. Paralyzed muscles eventually atrophy, that is, become smaller and from lack of use. Other disorders that affect muscle functioning are discussed in boxes 7.3 and 7.4. Takeaways. 1. For the beginning of the contraction mechanism, put these in the proper sequence. A Acetylcholine is released and crosses the synapse. B. Calcium ions are released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum and bond to the troponin-tropomyosin complex. C. A nerve impulse arises at the axon terminal. D. The inhibitory proteins are shifted away from the actin filament. E. Sodium ions enter the cell. The sarcolemma depolarizes. Answer: C, A, E, B, D. 2. For the end of the contraction mechanism, put these in the proper sequence. A. Myosin bridges pull actin filament to the center of the sarcomere. B. Potassium ions leave the cell. The sarcolemma repolarizes. C. Choline sterase inactivates acetylcholine. D. Myosin splits ATP to release energy. E. The sarcomere shortens. Answer: D, A, E, B, C. Benefits and maintaining responses to exercise. Long-term benefits in maintaining homeostasis. Exercise, meaning any physical activity, doing the vacuuming and other household work counts, has lately been the subject of a great deal of research into its effects on parts of the body other than muscles themselves. The benefits of once or twice weekly exercise, a regular schedule of running, swimming, even brisk walking, for the heart and respiratory system have been known for a long time. The heart muscle is strengthened, as are the respiratory muscles, and lung capacity is increased. Exercising when younger and enlarging lung capacity provides for a greater lung capacity throughout life and into age. Exercise has also been proposed to contribute to the enhanced regulation of blood glucose levels, which, as you will see later in text chapter 10, involve several endocrine glands and their hormones. One of the most intriguing possibilities is that exercise has beneficial effects on the brain, specifically on learning and memory. Memory is a creation of the brain, and much of this work has been done with laboratory mice. These rodents are not physiologically quite the same as people, but mice are smart, in parentheses, about mice-like things such as how and where to find food, close parentheses. And they love to run on the wheels in their cages. That is, they love to exercise. A simple experiment may have two groups of mice learn to navigate a maze to find food. One group has exercise wheels and runs for hours each day. The other group has no wheels. They are sedentary, just sitting around eating, sleeping, and probably being bored. Yes, mice can be bored. After 2 weeks of receiving food in their cages, mice in both groups have to get their food from the maze again. The mice that exercised while they learned the maze during the intervening weeks recalled the path of the maze much better and found their food far more quickly than did the sedentary mice. This type of study has been repeated many times with the same results. Regular and consistent exercise seems to improve learning and memory, and though studies so far have been relatively small, similar work with people suggests the same benefit. Another suggestion: if you are studying, don't sit for hours. Take a short break every hour or so. Get up and go for a walk. Put on some music and dance. Any kind of movement will do, and that is true for exercise in general. The best exercise is one that a person may enjoy and therefore will actually do on a regular basis. Also, a creation of the brain is how we generally feel: content or gloomy, pleased or grumpy, and so on. People who exercise regularly often report feeling more cheerful or optimistic when they do not exercise, or more so before they begin an exercise routine. Of course, exercise cannot change a naturally pessimistic person into an optimist, and in these studies, such feelings are subjective, are self-reported, and cannot be measured in a scientific way. but the sheer number of studies that describe or include the satisfying effect of exercise suggests that exercise may indeed influence our moods. For scientific measuring, let us return to mice. When using mice as subjects, it is also possible to examine their brains after death. Mice in the exercise group described above were found to have more neurons in the hippocampus, part of the brain where we believe mitosis can take place and is essential for forming and retaining new memories. The neurons, in parentheses, the neurons are no longer living, but the number of nuclei found in various stages of mitosis with visible chromosomes is an indication of meiotic activity, close parentheses. Why neurons would divide in response to exercise is still not known, but may in part be the result of increased circulation, meaning more oxygen getting to the brain, or it may be a form of chemical communication that hasn't yet been detected, or a combination of nervous and chemical stimuli. There is much more still to be discovered about the benefits of exercise, but while we are learning, we must also be skeptical of extravagant claims. Thus far, there is no evidence at all that any type of exercise regimen can delay the onset of any of the many types of dementia. Let us now look at exercise over the short term. Say a 30-minute jog or run. Engaging in moderate or strenuous exercise is a psychological stress situation, a change that the body must cope with, yet still maintain a normal internal environment, that is, homeostasis. Some of the body's responses to exercise are diagrammed in figure 7.6. Notice how the responses are related to the increase in cell respiration in the muscles. As you can see, the respiratory and cardiovascular systems make essential and immediate contributions to exercise. The integumentary system also has a role because it eliminates excess body heat by way of vasodilation and sweating. Although not shown, the nervous system is also directly involved. As we have seen, the brain generates the impulses for muscle contraction, coordinates those contractions, and regulates heart rate, breathing rate, and the diameter of blood vessels. The next time you run up a flight of stairs, hurry to catch a bus, or just go dancing, you might reflect a moment on all of the things that are actually happening to your body after you catch your breath. Takeaway 6. 1. Name 4 minerals that are necessary for efficient exercise. Answer: sodium and potassium for impulses at the sarcomere, calcium inside the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and iron and hemoglobin and myoglobin all contribute to muscle contraction. Two, in any type of exercise, what large voluntary muscle always gets a workout? Describe its location and how it moves when it contracts. Yes, there is only one, but it is bilateral. Answer: the diaphragm is the dome-shaped voluntary muscle that separates the thoracic and abdominal cavities. When it contracts, it flattens and moves down to enlarge the thoracic cavity. Aging and the muscular system. With age, muscle cells die and are replaced by fibrous connective tissue or fat. Regular exercise, however, delays atrophy of muscles. Although muscles become slower to contract and their maximal strength decreases, exercise can maintain muscle functioning at a level that meets whatever a person needs for daily activities. The lifting of small weights is recommended as exercise for elderly people, women as well as men. Such exercise also benefits the cardiovascular, respiratory, and skeletal systems. The loss of muscle fibers also contributes to loss of proprioception because the brain is getting less information about where and how the body is positioned. The loss of muscle sense contributes to unsteadiness in elderly people and to an impaired sense of balance, which in turn may lead to a fall. Simple awareness of this may help an elderly person prevent such accidents Another preventive measure is exercise. Yes, exercise benefits sensation. The more that muscles are exercised, the more the brain keeps track of them. Giving the brain such work keeps its mental imaging of muscles a full-time job. For older people, exercise to music, in parentheses, or dancing of any kind, close parentheses, seems to be especially beneficial for helping to maintain the sense of balance and muscle strength. Major muscles of the body. The action that muscles perform are listed in Table 7.4 and are shown in Figure 7.7. Most are in pairs of antagonistic functions. After the brief summaries of the muscles of each body area that follow, the muscles are shown in the figures. They are listed according to body area. When you study the diagrams of these muscles as well as the tables that accompany them, keep in mind the types of joints formed by the bones of their origins and insertions. Muscles pull bones to produce movement, and if you remember the joints involved, you can easily learn the locations and actions of the muscles. The name of the muscles may also be helpful, and again, many of the terms are ones you have already learned. Some examples: abdominis refers to the abdominal muscle, femoris to a thigh muscle, and brachii to a muscle of the upper arm, oculi to an eye muscle, and so on. Other part of muscle names may be words such as longus or maximus that tell you about size, and flexor or abductor that tell you about function. Muscles that are sites for intramuscular injections are shown in box 7.5. Muscles of the head and neck. 3 general groups of muscles are found in the head and neck. Those that move the head or neck, the muscles of facial expressions, and the muscles of chewing. The muscles that turn or bend the head, such as sternocleidomastoids, in parentheses, flexions, close parentheses, and the pair of splenius capitis muscles, extension, close parentheses, are anchored to the skull and to the clavicle and sternum anteriorly, or the vertebrae posteriorly. The muscles for smiling or frowning or raising an eyebrow in disbelief are anchored to the bone of the head or to the undersurface of the skin of the face. The masseter is an important chewing muscle in that it raises the mandible, closes the jaw, close parentheses, and you can feel it at the rear edge of your mandible when you clench your teeth. Muscles of the trunk. The muscles of the trunk cannot be described with one or two general functions. Some form the wall of the trunk and bend the trunk. Some as the rectus abdominis, flexion, and the sacrospinalis group, extension. The trapezius, in parentheses, both together form the shape of the trapezoid, is a large muscle that can raise, shrug the shoulder or pull it back. It can help extend the head. Other muscles found on the trunk help move the arm at the shoulder. The pectoralis major is a large muscle of the chest that pulls the arm across the chest, in parentheses, flexion and adduction, close parentheses, on the posterior side of the trunk. The latissimus dorsi pulls the arm downward and behind the back, extension and adduction. These muscles have their origins on the bones of the trunk, the sternum, or the vertebrae, which are strong, stable anchors. Another set of muscles form the pelvic floor, where the muscles support the pelvic organs and assist with urination and defecation. Yet another category is the muscles that are concerned with breathing. These are the intercostal muscles between the ribs and the diaphragm, which separates the thoracic and abdominal cavities. Muscles of the shoulder and arm. The triangular deltoid muscle covers the point of the shoulder like a cap and can pull the humerus to the side, abduction, forward, flexion, or backward, extension. You already know the function of the bicep brachii and tricep brachii, the muscles that form the bulk of the upper arm. Other muscles, particularly in the upper arm, help bend the elbow. The muscles that form the bulk of the forearm are the flexors and extensors of the hand and fingers. You can demonstrate this yourself by clasping the middle of your right forearm with your left hand, then moving your right hand at the wrist and closing and opening a fist. You can both feel and see the hand and fingers muscles at work. Muscles of the hip and leg. The hip muscles that move the thigh are anchored to the pelvic bone and cross the hip joint to the femur. Among these are the gluteus maximus, gluteus medius, and iliopsoas. The muscles that form the thigh include the quadricep group anteriorly and hamstring group posteriorly. For the most people, the quadriceps is stronger than the hamstrings, which is why athletes more often have a pull hamstring rather than a pull quadricep. The adductor group of muscles is medial and opposes the gluteus medius. Movement of the knee joint depends on the thigh muscle and lower leg muscles. Movement of the foot depends on lower leg muscles such as the gastrocnemius and the tibialis anterior. Whoa. That ends the chapter 7, the muscle system.
If you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But by all means, keep moving.
Amen.
Know what to say amen to.
Amen. Got it.